The wind howled across the quiet cemetery as if it was mourning with the people gathered there, bending the long grass and rattling the flowers left on nearby graves. Among the small crowd stood a single father named Daniel Hayes, a man who had known hardship, loss, and survival all his life. Yet nothing could have prepared him for what happened the moment he heard a soft gasp behind him, a gasp that would change everything. When he turned, he saw a pregnant woman clutching her belly, her breath short, her face pale. She stood unsteady in the cold morning air, surrounded by people dressed in black who didn't seem to notice her weakening stance. At that instant, Daniel didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, reaching out just before she collapsed, catching her in his arms with the strength and urgency of someone who had spent years holding his life together with nothing but hope, grit, and a father's love. Before you dive deeper into this emotional journey, if you believe kindness, compassion, and second chances can change the world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. Daniel wasn't supposed to be at this funeral. He had only shown up because his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, had asked him if angels were real, and he had promised her they'd visit the cemetery where her mother was buried every month. Today was that day. After leaving flowers at his late wife's headstone, he noticed another service happening nearby. He didn't know the deceased, but he stood at a respectful distance as Lily held his hand and looked around with wide, innocent eyes. That was when the pregnant woman collapsed. Her weight felt fragile, almost feather-like in his arms, yet he could sense the tension in her body, the kind of tension that came from days of crying, sleepless nights, and emotional exhaustion. She was dressed in a white maternity gown under a long black coat, the fabric fluttering with the passing wind. Her blonde hair, curled at the ends, spilled over her shoulders as she leaned into him, breathing shakily. The baby inside her shifted visibly beneath her dress, as if sensing her distress. Daniel quickly guided her to a bench beneath a large oak tree, lowering her gently while calling out for someone to bring water. To his surprise, none of the guests from her funeral service stepped forward. They watched but didn't move, their faces stiff and distant, as if the woman didn't belong to them. As the woman steadied her breath, Daniel could see tear streaks on her cheeks. She pressed a trembling hand against her belly, whispering something under her breath. Her grief poured out like waves crashing against rocks, raw and powerful. Her eyes, filled with deep sadness and exhaustion, flickered with faint gratitude when she finally managed to look at him. Her wedding ring glinted briefly in the dim light, cold and metallic, a symbol of a love that, based on the coffin nearby, was now gone forever. The funeral ended, and the crowd dispersed. Yet not a single person approached the woman. They walked away as if she was invisible. Daniel, confused and disturbed, stayed by her side, keeping watch. His daughter stood close, concerned and quiet, her small hand clutching the edge of his jacket. For nearly half an hour, the woman sat there in silence, gathering herself. The cemetery grew emptier, the sky darker with thickening clouds. She hadn't spoken a word since she collapsed, but Daniel didn't pressure her. He simply offered his jacket and waited patiently, knowing from experience that sometimes silence spoke louder than questions. When she finally stood, she swayed slightly, and he instinctively held out his arm for support. She accepted it with a grateful nod. She walked slowly toward a freshly covered grave, the one that had just been filled. Her eyes softened with a heartbreak so deep it seemed to reach into the soil beneath her feet. She placed her palm over her belly again, then lowered herself into a kneel despite her difficulty. Daniel looked away respectfully, giving her privacy, but he could still hear her quiet sobs carried by the wind. When she finally rose again, her legs trembled. Daniel stepped toward her, offering help once more. She accepted without hesitation. He walked her to her car, an older vehicle with peeling paint and a cracked mirror. She looked like she wanted to say something, explain, thank him, release the weight pressing on her chest, but instead she simply placed her hand over his and squeezed gently before driving away. He watched her disappear down the winding cemetery path, unaware that this simple act of kindness would trigger a chain of events that would alter his life forever. Later that afternoon, after dropping Lily at school and returning to his small apartment where bills piled up like unwelcome guests, Daniel heard a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, a man in a dark suit stood there holding an envelope with Daniel's name typed neatly on the front. The man introduced himself as a representative of a law firm, but before Daniel could ask questions, the man simply bowed his head respectfully, handed him the envelope, and walked away. Inside the envelope was a letter. As he unfolded the crisp white paper, he felt a strange prickle on the back of his neck. The letter began by identifying the deceased men from the funeral, someone Daniel didn't know. But as he read, his heart began to pound. The letter stated that the pregnant woman he had helped earlier that day was the widow of the deceased billionaire, a reclusive investor whose wealth was nearly unimaginable. She had been abandoned by most of the people who attended the funeral, not because they didn't know her, but because they believed she had married for money. Her late husband, knowing how people treated her, had prepared something in his will, something extraordinary. His will stated that if, on the day of his funeral, any stranger showed genuine kindness to his widow without expectation of reward, he wanted that person to receive the majority share of his estate. This clause, the letter explained, was written intentionally to honor the values he believed the world lacked: compassion, empathy, and genuine humanity. And Daniel, an ordinary single father who lived paycheck to paycheck, who knew loss better than most, who helped without hesitation, was the stranger. The final paragraphs listed the total inheritance transferred to his name, $500 million. Daniel sank onto the couch, the letter trembling in his hands. His mind couldn't grasp the number. For years, he had worried about rent, medical bills, childcare, and the mountain of debt left behind after his wife's passing. He had worked long night shifts, sacrificed sleep, sold personal belongings, and skipped meals so Lily could eat. He had fought his way through life quietly, humbly, never asking for anything in return. And now, a fortune beyond imagination was suddenly his. He closed his eyes, overcome with emotion. Memories of holding Lily as a newborn flooded his mind, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders, the crippling fear of not being enough. Memories of telling his daughter stories before bed, pretending to be strong even when he felt broken inside. Memories of looking up at the sky after losing his wife and whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Now, for the first time in years, he felt something new, relief. But along with relief came disbelief and guilt. Why him? Why now? What did this mean for Lily? How would he keep her grounded? How would he honor the men whose generosity felt almost unreal? That evening, Daniel returned to the cemetery with flowers, not for his wife this time, but for a man he never met, someone who saw the world with clarity beyond wealth. As he walked through the rows of graves, he heard soft footsteps behind him. When he turned, the pregnant woman stood there once more. She looked different now, not physically, but emotionally. Her shoulders no longer sagged with the weight of loneliness. Her eyes, though still red from grief, shimmered with gratitude and quiet strength. She approached him slowly, her hand resting on her belly. She revealed her name was Emma, and she thanked him, not for the money, but for something far more meaningful. She thanked him for treating her like a human being when everyone else had turned their backs. She said her husband had always believed that true character was shown in moments of silence, not applause, and Daniel had proven him right. She told him that she hoped the money would not change him but empower him. She said she believed he would use it to build the life he deserved, the life his daughter deserved. Daniel promised her he would. He spent the next weeks adjusting to a new world. He paid off debts, bought a modest home near the countryside for a fresh start, and set up a trust fund for Lily's future. He quietly donated to charities that supported single parents and struggling families. He didn't buy extravagance. He didn't chase luxury. Instead, he chased purpose. Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became livable, breathable, hopeful. Lily grew up surrounded not by wealth but by love, stability, and kindness, values Daniel prioritized above everything. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more life-changing stories to the world.